Royal Guard exposed Trump's son's secret. 17 seconds later, everyone watched him crumble. The air buzzed with conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the soft hum of a live string quartet playing near the far corner of the room. Guests in elegant gowns and tailored suits moved gracefully through the space, exchanging polite greetings, networking, and enjoying the exquisite catering that had been prepared for this exclusive event. For many, this gala was the social highlight of the year, a gathering of influential figures from politics, business, and diplomacy. Among the attendees was Eric Trump, the eldest son of a former president. Known for his confident presence and polished image, Eric walked through the crowd with a smile that seemed effortless, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. His tailored suit fit perfectly, his tie was straight, and his hair, combed back carefully, gave him the air of someone used to commanding attention wherever he went. On the surface, he appeared relaxed and composed, moving as if he owned the room. But beneath that calm exterior, there was always a sense of careful calculation, a constant awareness of who was watching, what was being said, and how every interaction might shape his public image. Not far from him stood a distinguished figure who drew attention for entirely different reasons. A royal guard from the United Kingdom, dressed in his ceremonial uniform, remained stoic and upright. Unlike the gala's other attendees, he did not mingle or engage in small talk. His presence was unusual yet commanding, with polished boots, a neatly pressed red coat, and the iconic bearskin hat that towered above him. Though he was far from his home country, and this was not his usual duty, he had been invited as a symbol of diplomatic goodwill, a representative of tradition and discipline amidst a room buzzing with chatter and social maneuvering. He moved through the hall with precise steps, observant eyes, and a calm demeanor, seemingly unaffected by the glances of curious guests. As the evening progressed, Eric found himself navigating conversations with a mix of charm and subtle assertiveness. He spoke to philanthropists about their charitable projects, complimented entrepreneurs on their recent successes, and made sure to position himself as someone who understood influence, business, and the importance of connections. While he smiled and laughed with ease, those who observed more closely could detect the underlying strategy in his interactions. Every compliment, every nod, every laugh was measured to maintain his image as both approachable and powerful. Meanwhile, the royal guard maintained a quiet vigilance. He did not seek attention, nor did he participate in the networking that filled the room. Instead, his eyes moved systematically, observing the behavior of those around him. He noticed subtle interactions, gestures, and moments that others overlooked. While the crowd was focused on appearances and conversation, he noticed the small inconsistencies in how people presented themselves. To him, these details were important. In his line of duty, observing behavior and understanding truth was a matter of principle, and he applied that same rigor here, even in a social setting. Eric eventually found himself in conversation with a group of influential guests, discussing the latest developments in real estate and politics. His voice was confident, and his anecdotes were polished. As he spoke, he gestured slightly with his hands, emphasizing points, drawing attention without seeming overly dramatic. The crowd responded with nods and laughter, impressed by his apparent ease and familiarity with complex topics. From an outsider's perspective, it seemed as though Eric held the room in the palm of his hand. But the royal guard's presence added an undercurrent of tension that was hard to ignore. He observed Eric with a discerning eye, noting the confidence that masked unease, the rehearsed charm that hinted at past mistakes carefully hidden from the public eye. For Eric, this presence was subtle but noticeable. He felt almost instinctively the weight of scrutiny, even though the guard had not said a word. There was something in the way the guard stood, in the calm assessment behind the stoic expression, that suggested he saw more than most. It was a reminder that appearances could be dissected, analyzed, and understood by those who truly paid attention. As the evening continued, Eric's path crossed with several journalists covering the event. Cameras clicked discreetly, and microphones were held at angles that captured snippets of conversation. He was used to such attention and maintained his usual composure, smiling for the cameras and offering brief statements about the gala's charitable goals. But even in these moments, the royal guard's presence remained a subtle pressure. The guard was not a threat, but his observant nature made Eric acutely aware that someone in the room was seeing beyond the polished exterior, someone who would not be easily swayed by charm or deflection. Eric took a moment to glance around the room. The grandeur of the hall, the elegance of the guests, and the careful arrangement of tables and decorations created an image of perfection. Yet perfection, he knew, was often an illusion. Behind the smiles, behind the handshakes and polite laughter, there were stories, secrets, and mistakes that people wanted to keep hidden. It was this awareness that had shaped much of his life, the need to manage perception, to control narrative, and to protect image. And tonight, he sensed that one person in particular might have the insight to see through that carefully maintained facade. The royal guard, standing slightly apart from the main crowd, had positioned himself near a quiet corner of the hall. From here, he could observe without being intrusive, taking note of interactions and listening carefully. Though he did not engage, his posture and presence carried a sense of authority and attentiveness that was difficult to ignore. Eric, as he moved closer to greet a diplomat, felt the weight of those eyes. It was an unfamiliar sensation, the feeling of being seen for what one truly was, not for the image presented to the world. Guests continued to mingle, unaware of the subtle tension building between the two men. Eric laughed at a joke from a fellow attendee, shook hands with a philanthropist, and moved smoothly from conversation to conversation. Yet with every interaction, he felt the silent observation of the royal guard. It was as if the guard were waiting for something, not to judge harshly, but simply to acknowledge the truth, to witness what others might overlook. The gala reached its peak when the host called for a short speech. Eric, like many others, took his place among the seated guests, clapping politely for the speakers while listening carefully to the words being shared. The topics of charity, diplomacy, and international cooperation were discussed with eloquence and formality. But Eric's mind, while outwardly attentive, wandered briefly to the royal guard, pondering the quiet intensity of his presence. There was a sense that the evening, despite its elegance and surface charm, was moving toward a moment of revelation, though Eric could not have predicted how that would unfold. In the final hour before the gala concluded, Eric made his way toward the refreshment tables, where a small group of guests had gathered for casual conversation. He exchanged a few polite words, laughed at light-hearted comments, and carefully navigated the complex web of social dynamics. The royal guard, still observing silently, remained near the edge of the crowd, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. Though the guard had not intervened, the awareness of being watched created an invisible pressure, a quiet tension that Eric could feel with every step and gesture. By the time the gala's music began to soften and guests prepared to leave, Eric felt a mix of relief and unease. The evening had gone smoothly on the surface, but beneath the layers of charm, networking, and conversation, there lingered the presence of someone who had seen beyond the carefully constructed facade. It was a subtle reminder that even in the most controlled environments, truth had a way of revealing itself, and that image alone could not shield one from scrutiny. As the crowd began to disperse, Eric gave a final wave to the photographers and journalists. He smiled, confident as always, yet there was a flicker of tension in his eyes, a small but undeniable acknowledgement of the royal guard's quiet scrutiny. For those who had been paying attention, it was clear that the night had set the stage for a confrontation that would reveal more than anyone could have anticipated. And for Eric, the realization that appearances could only protect him so much lingered in the back of his mind as he stepped into the elevator, preparing for the next chapter of the evening. The evening had settled into a rhythm. Guests at the gala had finished their meals and moved on to lighter conversations, laughter echoing softly across the grand hall. Eric Trump, still carrying his polished demeanor, floated among the clusters of attendees. To the outside world, he appeared calm, confident, and in control, effortlessly balancing charm with influence. Every handshake, every smile, every nod seemed perfectly rehearsed. But underneath, there was an ever-present tension, a subtle awareness that not everything in this room could be navigated with charm alone. The royal guard, standing quietly near the back of the hall, remained observant. He had watched Eric from the moment he arrived, noting the way he carried himself, the way he engaged with guests, and the small inconsistencies between what he said and what his actions suggested. Unlike the others, the guard's role wasn't to mingle or make an impression. It was to observe, understand, and if necessary, act with integrity. He had been trained for situations where a single moment could reveal the truth, and tonight he sensed that such a moment was approaching. As Eric moved closer to a small group of journalists and philanthropists, the guard followed subtly, keeping his distance yet staying in a position where he could witness every exchange. The conversation was light at first, comments about charitable initiatives, the city's development, and recent international events. Eric spoke with his usual confidence, effortlessly shifting topics and drawing attention with anecdotes that seemed both impressive and relatable. But the guard noticed small hesitations in Eric's responses, brief pauses that hinted at a deeper discomfort. It was the kind of hesitation that someone who had seen many situations could recognize immediately, an awareness that something hidden might soon surface. It was during this casual conversation that the moment arrived. A philanthropist mentioned a past charitable project that had been in the news, speaking with admiration about the success of the campaign. Eric smiled politely, nodding in agreement, but his mind raced. He had been involved in that particular project in the past, and though the headlines had celebrated its success, there were details that had been carefully kept private. The royal guard, standing quietly nearby, picked up on Eric's slight stiffening and decided to act, not out of malice, but out of a commitment to transparency and truth. The guard stepped forward slightly, addressing Eric with a calm but deliberate tone. "I believe there are aspects of that project that are less known to the public," he said, his voice measured but firm. "It might be important for everyone here to understand the full story." The room, previously filled with light chatter, seemed to pause. Guests turned slightly, curious about the sudden shift in conversation. Eric froze for a moment, his practiced smile faltering. The elegance and confidence that had carried him through the evening began to show signs of strain. In those 17 seconds that followed, the atmosphere changed entirely. The crowd sensed a tension that had not been there before, an invisible spotlight that had shifted onto Eric. He attempted to respond with humor, a light remark to deflect attention, but the royal guard's calm presence and precise words left little room for evasion. The pause stretched longer than usual, each second magnifying the pressure, until it became clear that Eric's composure was slipping. The journalists, attuned to subtle cues, began to whisper among themselves, sensing a story unfolding before their eyes. Eric's attempts to redirect the conversation were met with gentle but unwavering insistence from the guard. Every word the guard spoke was factual, careful, and respectful, yet it exposed inconsistencies in Eric's public statements. The audience, composed of influential individuals, journalists, and diplomats, watched as the confident facade began to crack. What had seemed like a simple social interaction now carried the weight of accountability. Guests leaned slightly forward, intrigued, while others exchanged quiet comments, noting the unusual and rare sight of a high-profile figure confronted in such a subtle but undeniable way. The exposure was not dramatic in the traditional sense. There was no shouting, no accusation. It was subtle, almost clinical. The guard outlined facts that were verified, details that Eric had previously avoided acknowledging publicly. The charm and confidence that had carried him through countless events suddenly felt fragile. Eric's mind raced. He considered deflecting further, shifting blame, or offering excuses, but the guard's composed presence made it difficult to find a credible path forward. Every word, every gesture from the guard underscored the weight of the truth, and the audience could feel the shift in power dynamics. 17 seconds is a brief moment, yet it stretched infinitely in Eric's perception. Every person in the room seemed to hold their breath. For the first time that evening, Eric's carefully curated image faltered. He shifted slightly from foot to foot, his hands unconsciously moving to adjust his jacket, his smile tightening. Inside, he was aware that this moment could be remembered long after the gala ended. The royal guard, steadfast and composed, maintained eye contact, signaling that there was no rush, no pressure beyond the natural insistence of truth. It was a quiet confrontation, but it carried enormous impact. The guests began to react subtly. Some exchanged glances, others whispered softly, and a few journalists discreetly raised their cameras and microphones, knowing they had stumbled upon a moment of unexpected honesty. Eric tried to regain control, speaking quickly about other topics, laughing lightly, and attempting to navigate back to familiar territory. Yet the underlying tension remained. Every movement, every word, was now scrutinized not just by the royal guard, but by the attentive audience who sensed the unspoken revelation. Eric's internal struggle was evident, though he attempted to hide it. He had always relied on charm, public perception, and control of narrative to maintain his image. Yet here, faced with the calm authority of the royal guard, he realized that those tools were limited. Truth has a subtle power. It does not need to shout to be effective. The royal guard demonstrated this in the most understated way possible. By simply observing, presenting facts clearly, and refusing to be swayed by appearances, he forced Eric to confront aspects of his past that he had long avoided. As the seconds passed, Eric began to feel the weight of the room's attention. The stories, rumors, and private knowledge that had once been hidden behind layers of public statements now hovered in the space around him. Guests sensed the tension, the rare sight of vulnerability in someone usually so confident. The royal guard, continuing to speak with calm authority, allowed the information to surface naturally, without dramatization, leaving Eric to respond in real time. Finally, Eric's composure began to crumble. He shifted from casual conversation to a quieter, more defensive posture. His responses became fragmented, his usual eloquence faltering under the weight of scrutiny. The carefully maintained image of ease and charm was now overshadowed by the reality of exposure. In the eyes of the audience, the confident socialite had become human, vulnerable, and visibly affected by the confrontation. The shift was subtle but undeniable, and those present were captivated by the honesty of the moment. The room, previously filled with laughter and casual conversation, now carried a different energy. There was respect for the royal guard's integrity, admiration for his calm and factual approach, and a sense of fascination with Eric's visible struggle. For the first time, the gala was not just about networking or appearances. It had become a live display of accountability, a rare moment where truth and perception collided in real time. Even after Eric attempted to redirect attention and move away from the conversation, the effect lingered. Guests whispered quietly, journalists made mental notes, and the royal guard observed without interference, allowing the lesson to settle naturally. Eric, meanwhile, found a brief moment to step aside, taking a deep breath as he tried to process what had just occurred. The 17 seconds had left a lasting impression, not just on him, but on everyone who had witnessed the unfolding drama. By the end of the night, the story of the royal guard's subtle confrontation had begun to spread among attendees. Some spoke in hushed tones about the remarkable professionalism of the guard, while others commented on the rare sight of someone as high-profile as Eric Trump being visibly challenged in a public setting. It was clear that the evening would be remembered not only for its glitz and grandeur, but for the quiet yet powerful display of accountability and observation that had unfolded. For Eric, the experience was sobering. He had faced a moment that could not be controlled with charm, deflection, or rehearsed responses. The royal guard had done nothing more than present truth calmly and factually, yet the impact had been profound. As he left the gala, the flash of cameras, the whispers of attendees, and the memory of those 17 seconds stayed with him. It was a reminder that no matter how carefully one crafts a public image, truth has a way of finding its moment to shine, and sometimes even the smallest confrontation can leave a lasting mark. After the confrontation, the atmosphere in the gala had subtly shifted. The music, which had been lively and celebratory, now seemed almost distant to Eric Trump. Though the room continued to sparkle with conversation and laughter, he felt a strange heaviness pressing against his chest. For years, Eric had relied on charm, confidence, and careful control of perception to navigate social and professional spaces. Tonight, however, none of those strategies seemed sufficient. The royal guard's calm, factual exposure had pierced through the layers he had so carefully constructed. Eric moved through the crowd with a smile still painted on his face, but it no longer felt genuine. Each handshake and nod required conscious effort. Each word he spoke was measured, and yet he could feel the eyes of others on him, not all of them perhaps, but enough to make the air feel heavier. He was aware, now more than ever, that the guests were talking, observing, and interpreting what had happened. The 17 seconds of exposure replayed in his mind repeatedly, like a loop he could not pause or stop. Every gesture, every subtle hesitation, every moment of faltering confidence came back to him with vivid clarity. The royal guard had returned to a quiet corner, observing with steady eyes, as if nothing had happened. But Eric knew better. That calm presence, that unwavering focus, had made him see himself in a way he rarely allowed. Vulnerable, exposed, and undeniably human. The crowd's attention had shifted, even subtly, toward the guard's demonstration of integrity and quiet authority. To Eric, the contrast was stark. On one side, he had carefully curated charisma. On the other, an unflinching calm that demanded truth and transparency. The comparison left him unsettled, highlighting the cracks in the persona he had worked so hard to maintain. Journalists, ever attentive, had noticed the subtle but powerful shift as well. Some whispered quietly to their colleagues, jotting notes on their devices. A few discreetly positioned cameras and microphones in the direction of Eric, capturing moments of tension that contrasted sharply with the cheerful demeanor he had displayed earlier. For Eric, each glance, each subtle click of a camera, was a reminder that this moment would not easily be forgotten. Even within the grandeur of the gala, the perception of the event had changed. Trying to regain composure, Eric sought out familiar faces, friends, acquaintances, and loyal supporters. He engaged them with polite conversation, attempting to redirect attention and restore some semblance of normalcy. Yet even here, the emotional residue of the confrontation lingered. Every laugh felt slightly hollow, every compliment slightly strained. The words he had rehearsed, the anecdotes he had carefully prepared, now seemed inadequate. He realized that charm alone could not erase the impact of having one's hidden truth quietly revealed in front of a discerning audience. In a moment of brief respite, Eric stepped aside to a quieter area of the hall. He leaned against a polished marble pillar, his hands lightly resting in front of him as he tried to breathe evenly. The gala continued around him, yet he felt distant from it. He could still hear soft laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the low hum of conversation, but it all felt like it belonged to someone else. The reality of what had just occurred pressed down on him. For years, he had been protected by public perception, by curated images, and by the careful management of narrative. Tonight had stripped away that protection, if only for a brief but unforgettable moment. Eric's mind replayed the exact sequence of events. The royal guard's voice, calm and precise, had presented facts that could not be dismissed. The subtle yet undeniable scrutiny of his actions and statements had created a spotlight on his vulnerabilities. The audience's reactions, the quiet gasps, the exchanged glances, the journalists' whispers, had made it clear that this was more than a simple social misstep. It was a rare public reckoning, a moment where personal history intersected with public observation, and Eric could not control the outcome with charm or deflection. The emotional impact began to intensify. Eric felt a mix of anxiety, shame, and frustration. These were not unfamiliar emotions, but experiencing them in such a public and inescapable way was new. He had always managed such feelings privately, behind closed doors or in carefully curated environments. Yet now every guest at the gala had, at some level, witnessed the unraveling of his carefully maintained composure. He felt the weight of eyes on him, some sympathetic, some curious, and some quietly critical. Each glance was a subtle reminder of the fleeting nature of control and the inescapable power of truth. As he attempted to navigate the remaining moments of the evening, Eric noticed the subtle ways in which the dynamic had changed. Conversations that had once flowed naturally now carried an underlying tension. Attendees who had previously engaged freely seemed more measured in their words, perhaps unsure of how to approach the now vulnerable figure before them. Even those who had not directly witnessed the confrontation were aware of the shift, sensing that a significant moment had occurred. Eric, keenly aware of every detail, felt the social landscape of the gala changing in real time. Despite his efforts to maintain composure, Eric's interactions became noticeably strained. Simple greetings required extra effort. Jokes that would have once elicited laughter now fell flat. He tried to refocus on the gala's purpose: networking, supporting charity, and engaging with influential figures. But the memory of the Royal Guard's exposure lingered like a shadow over every conversation. The contrast between the calm integrity of the Guard and his own faltering composure became impossible to ignore. And for Eric, It was a humbling realization. The emotional peak of the evening came when Eric found himself near a group of key supporters. He attempted to engage them with his usual mix of charm and persuasive speech, but the words felt heavier than usual, weighed down by the lingering pressure of exposure. He could see the subtle awareness in their expressions, the recognition that the confident image he projected was, at least temporarily, shaken. This realization intensified the emotional impact, making it clear that his carefully constructed persona was not impervious. Eric excused himself to a small side lounge, seeking a quiet place to process the events. He sank into a plush chair, hands resting on his knees, and took a few deep breaths. In the quiet, he allowed himself to reflect on the confrontation and its implications. The royal guard had acted with calm authority, presenting facts without judgment or exaggeration, and the effect had been undeniable. For Eric, it was a moment of personal reckoning, a rare instance where external observation forced an internal confrontation with truth and vulnerability. He realized that, for all his experience in managing public perception, there were moments that could not be controlled. The carefully crafted image, the rehearsed charm, and the strategic conversations all mattered less when faced with someone who observed with integrity and attention. The 17 seconds of exposure had created ripples that extended far beyond the immediate interaction, affecting how he viewed himself, how others viewed him, and how he would approach similar situations in the future. Gradually, Eric began to understand that this moment, though challenging, carried a valuable lesson. Vulnerability, when confronted with honesty and integrity, can reveal truths that are impossible to hide indefinitely. The Royal Guard, by remaining calm and factual, had demonstrated the subtle but undeniable power of transparency. For Eric, the lesson was clear. No matter how carefully one manages perception, truth has a way of surfacing, and it is in moments like these that character is tested and revealed. By the time the gala began to wind down, Eric's demeanor had shifted. While still maintaining composure, there was a newfound awareness in his eyes, a recognition that the evening had marked a turning point. The crowd, too, had been affected, quietly observing the interplay of charm, vulnerability, and integrity. Conversations around the hall reflected a mix of admiration for the guard's professionalism and curiosity about Eric's visible struggle. It was a rare moment where the human aspects of high-profile figures became visible to all. As the last of the guests departed, Eric remained for a few final moments, reflecting quietly. The memory of the 17 seconds lingered, not as a source of shame, but as a reminder of the value of honesty and self-awareness. He had faced a moment that could not be managed with rehearsed words or charm alone, and in doing so, he had glimpsed the reality of his own limitations and strengths. The Royal Guard had provided an unexpected but powerful mirror, reflecting back a version of Eric that was human, accountable, and undeniably real. Walking away from the gala, Eric carried with him a mix of emotions: humility, awareness, and a sense of personal responsibility. He had experienced the emotional peak of exposure, felt the scrutiny of an attentive audience, and confronted a truth that could not be ignored. The event, once expected to be a showcase of influence and charm, had transformed into a moment of reflection, accountability, and personal growth. In those hours, the interplay of observation, truth, and human response had created an unforgettable experience, leaving a lasting impression on both Eric and everyone who had witnessed the subtle yet powerful unfolding of events. The gala had ended, and the grand hall was quiet. Staff were busy tidying tables, gathering decorations, and clearing away the remnants of an evening that had seemed, at first, like any other high-profile event. Yet for Eric Trump, the night was far from ordinary. The events of earlier, the confrontation, the exposure, the 17 seconds that had seemed like an eternity, had left a lasting impression on him. As he walked through the empty hall toward the exit, he felt the weight of reflection pressing upon him. It was not just the eyes of others he remembered, but the undeniable presence of truth that had been quietly but firmly presented. Outside, the city was alive with its usual hum. The lights of New York glimmered in the evening darkness. Taxis moved steadily along crowded streets, and the distant sounds of traffic mixed with the occasional chatter of pedestrians. Eric stepped into the cool air, his coat snug around him, and paused for a moment to take in the scene. The bustling world felt both familiar and strangely distant. In the quiet reflection of that moment, he considered what had occurred at the gala, replaying the sequence of events with careful thought. The confrontation with the royal guard was vivid in his memory. The guard had approached with calm authority, speaking facts that could not be ignored, and doing so without any malice or judgment. Eric had tried to maintain his composure, but the subtle exposure had revealed cracks in the carefully constructed image he presented to the world. Now, in the quiet moments after the gala, he understood the significance of what had happened. It was not a moment of shame, but of awareness, a rare opportunity to confront personal truths that had long been avoided. As Eric continued walking, he reflected on the reactions of the attendees. He realized that everyone at the gala had witnessed something unusual. A public figure, known for charm and confidence, confronted in a calm but undeniable way. Some had been quietly impressed by the royal guard's integrity, others curious about Eric's visible struggle. Even those who were not directly involved had sensed a subtle shift in the evening's energy. The event had transformed from a social gathering into a live demonstration of accountability, and he was at the center of it. Eric's thoughts turned inward, examining how he had handled the situation. He acknowledged that his initial reactions, trying to deflect, using humor, or attempting to regain control, were instinctive. They had been learned behaviors, tools he had relied on for years to manage perception. But in the presence of someone who observed with integrity and focus, those tools had proved insufficient. The royal guard had demonstrated, without force or aggression, that truth can be acknowledged and understood without dramatization. Eric realized that his reliance on charm and image had limits, and that humility and honesty were equally, if not more, powerful. The reflection was uncomfortable but necessary. Eric considered the private moments of his life and career that had been shielded from public view. The exposure had highlighted inconsistencies, moments of oversight, and decisions that had been made under pressure but later concealed from scrutiny. While these were not major scandals, the mere recognition of imperfection had created a powerful emotional effect. It was a reminder that no one, regardless of status or influence, is immune to accountability. As the city lights shimmered around him, Eric's perspective began to shift. What had initially felt like a public embarrassment now carried a sense of clarity. The confrontation had been an opportunity to reassess priorities, behavior, and the way he engaged with both personal and professional relationships. The royal guard had provided a mirror, reflecting back an image of himself that was authentic, vulnerable, and accountable. It was not a judgment, but a moment of revelation, one that Eric understood could guide him toward personal growth. Later, as he returned home, Eric considered how this experience might influence his future actions. He thought about the importance of transparency, the value of integrity, and the subtle power of calm observation. The royal guard had shown that strength is not only in influence, status, or public image, but in the ability to face truth without defensiveness or exaggeration. Eric felt a newfound appreciation for honesty, both in his interactions with others and within himself. He realized that maintaining an image of perfection was less meaningful than acknowledging reality and learning from it. Over the following days, Eric noticed the subtle ways in which the gala and the confrontation affected those around him. Attendees who had been present spoke about the royal guard's professionalism, sharing impressions of a moment where observation and integrity had revealed truths with quiet authority. Eric, while aware of these conversations, focused on his own reflections. He considered the impact of vulnerability, the importance of authenticity, and the subtle lessons that could be drawn from an event that had begun as a social gathering, but had evolved into a profound personal experience. The experience also encouraged Eric to think about public perception and responsibility. He understood that influence comes with scrutiny, and that accountability is a natural part of holding any position of visibility or power. The 17 seconds of exposure had been brief, but their impact was long-lasting. Eric realized that transparency, honesty, and integrity were essential not just for maintaining a positive image, but for personal growth and trust. He resolved to approach future situations with greater awareness, recognizing that truth, when presented calmly and respectfully, has a power that surpasses any curated narrative. In the quiet moments of reflection, Eric also considered the role of the Royal Guard. The Guard had not acted out of personal gain, judgment, or desire for recognition. Instead, he had acted with professionalism, calm observation, and commitment to integrity. His approach had demonstrated the value of steadfast attention to fact, the subtle influence of truth, and the respectful assertion of accountability. Eric recognized that this encounter was not just a personal test, but a demonstration of principles that could inspire anyone, regardless of background or position. As weeks passed, Eric began to integrate these lessons into his life. He approached conversations with greater mindfulness, listened more attentively, and acknowledged moments of imperfection without defensiveness. The memory of the gala and the 17 seconds remained vivid, serving as a guide for his personal and professional conduct. The experience had been humbling, yes, but also empowering. It reminded him that growth often comes from discomfort, reflection, and the willingness to confront truths that are not always convenient. The broader impact of the evening also became evident. Social media, news outlets, and attendees shared observations about the gala, focusing not on scandal but on the subtle dynamics of accountability and integrity. The Royal Guard was praised for his professionalism, and Eric's visible response sparked discussions about vulnerability, authenticity, and the human side of high-profile individuals. The event became a point of reflection for many, demonstrating that even in elite circles, honesty and observation hold transformative power. Through it all, Eric learned to view the confrontation not as a failure, but as an opportunity. He embraced the lesson that even the smallest moments, when approached with calm integrity, can have profound effects. He acknowledged that influence is not only about appearances or charm, but about credibility, authenticity, and responsibility. The Royal Guard's subtle but powerful approach had left an indelible mark, showing that strength lies in observing, understanding, and facing truth without fear or defensiveness. By the end of the story, Eric had not only reflected on the event but internalized its lessons. The confrontation had revealed vulnerabilities, but it had also provided clarity. He understood that personal growth is ongoing, that integrity is essential, and that moments of exposure can be catalysts for meaningful change. The gala, once seen as merely a social gathering, had become a turning point, a story of subtle revelation, emotional honesty, and the enduring power of truth. Walking through his daily life afterward, Eric carried the memory of the Royal Guard's presence and the 17 seconds that had left a lasting impression. He approached new interactions with humility and attentiveness, aware that influence and visibility come with responsibility. The lesson was simple yet profound. Charm and image can be fleeting, but integrity, honesty, and calm observation endure. The event had taught him that vulnerability is not weakness. It is an opportunity for growth, reflection, and authentic connection with others. Ultimately, the experience reshaped how Eric viewed himself and his interactions. He no longer saw perfection as the ultimate goal, but rather authenticity, accountability, and self-awareness. The gala, the confrontation, and the 17 seconds became a story he would carry forward, a reminder that truth, even in subtle forms, can illuminate character, guide decisions, and foster respect. The Royal Guard, through quiet observation and unwavering integrity, had provided a moment of transformation that would not be forgotten, leaving Eric with a lasting lesson about the power of honesty and the human experience of accountability.